course, there are a lot of questions about this visit, King Charles' visit to Canada. This is an interesting time to come, fraying ties with the U.S. There's economic uncertainty. So the question being, what are the Liberals hoping to accomplish here? In order to look ahead, we need to look to our past. So joining us now is Margaret MacMillan, an author and international historian with the University of Toronto, as well as Oxford University. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm delighted.
On such a historic day, I know that you are also following along and watching the visuals in the Senate as well. I want to ask you, first of all, your take on the Royals' visit. I know it's a bit of a loaded question because there are so many ways to go, but to deliver this throne speech, we have not seen it since Queen Elizabeth in 1977, the third time this is happening, the first time for King Charles to be here as king. So what do you make of just the visit in general?
It's hugely important symbolically, and it comes at a time of great crisis for Canada. We haven't been threatened, our existence hasn't been threatened like this for over 100 years. And I think the suggestions from south of the border that Canada become the 51st state have shaken Canadians a lot. And it's really important that we have international support. And I think the fact that the King has come is seen as a very important symbol. And symbols matter. They matter in private lives and they matter in public affairs.
Margaret, this is a very short visit, just about 24 hours, with the sole purpose of delivering this throne speech, which we know was crafted, written by the Liberal government. But do you anticipate that the King will insert something, whether it's symbolism, whether it's a few words that share his sentiments?
He has to be really careful what he says because he's a constitutional monarch. He has no power, but he has great influence. And he's already shown, I think, by certain actions that his sympathies are with Canada. He planted a maple tree in the grounds at Buckingham Palace. He's been seen wearing Canadian military decorations. But there are limits on what he can say publicly. And so I think he will be very careful. He has to take the advice of both the British government and the Canadian government. But I think the mere fact of his coming to Canada when he hasn't been well, so this trip will be something of a strain for him, I think. Coming to Canada is very important. Gestures often matter, and so I think the words are less important in this case than the symbolism.
Margaret, we know the U.S. administration indeed is watching this visit very closely. What kind of message, seeing these visuals, these handshakes, the very symbolic, as you said, planting the tree, wearing the pin, what sort of message does this send specifically to the U.S., or is it clear?
It's a message, I think, to us and to the U.S. and perhaps to anyone else in the world who's interested, is that we are a different country. We are not part of the United States. We don't want to be part of the United States. We have different traditions. In many ways, of course, we're closely related to the United States and we share a lot with them. But I think what we're showing by this is that we are a different country and we're a sovereign country. We have our own ways of doing things. We have a parliamentary democracy, which is different from that of the United States. We have our own traditions which we can see have owed a lot to the British traditions with the gentleman usher of the black rod and so on, but also have a lot to do with Canada itself, the fact that the Indigenous are playing such an important part in the ceremonies today, that we are a fully established country with our own traditions. And I think it's important for us to remember that. I think we are remembering it, but also an important message to the rest of the world.
Margaret, through his words, we've heard U.S. President Donald Trump show a level of respect for the King, and we know that the King has invited Trump across the pond again for a second official visit. Is there something that he can say that shifts the rhetoric a little bit when it comes to Canada's best interests?
Again, I think the King will probably not say anything much because he can't. But if he gets an opportunity, if he's talking privately to President Trump, he may, who knows, but he may underline that he finds Canada an interesting and different country, just to stress that Canada is its own nation and not just an adjunct of the United States. But as I say, the King is, he's been brought up to be very careful in what he does and to recognize the limits of what he can do.
Margaret, what do you think will be said in this throne speech? Again, we know, crafted by the government, but what are you looking for?
What will be said in the throne speech will be the program, as it always is, of what the government intends to carry out. It will be the opening of Parliament. But I suspect, given what Prime Minister Carney has already said publicly and other members of his cabinet have said publicly, that there will be something in it about Canada being a sovereign nation. I would be surprised if there weren't. But I think at this point there is, not much point in attacking the United States, but simply reiterating what Prime Minister Carney has already said, is that Canada is not for sale, it's a sovereign nation.
Margaret, what are your thoughts on the monarchy and its relationship to us here in Canada? It seems like this visit has re-injected interest, and perhaps more people seem to be paying attention with this visit. Clearly, that was thought through when Prime Minister Carney invited the King and Queen to visit us here in Canada. Do you think that this changes how Canadians view the monarchy?
I think it might do, Melanie. I mean, I was struck by the sort of interviews with Canadians on the streets and leading up to today, that they hadn't really thought much about the monarchy, but actually it's one of the things that makes us different from the United States. And I think at the moment, being different from the United States is something that's on the mind of a lot of Canadians. And so I think there's never been a particularly active Republican movement in Canada to get rid of the monarchy, but I think a lot of Canadians were more or less indifferent to it. But it may be that just as President Trump had an impact on the Canadian election, a huge impact on the Canadian election, he may be having an impact on the way in which Canadians look at the monarchy. It remains to be seen.
I'm not quite sure if you're able to see some of these live visuals right now. We are watching the King shaking hands with former prime ministers, currently with former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And it is interesting to see the exchange of words and the smiles and these small gestures, which we continue to talk about. And if only we had a mic a little bit closer in and we could hear what they're saying. Yeah. But what do you imagine these exchanges are looking like?
Well, I think what's important is that, again, it's the symbolism, isn't it? It's the fact that the former prime ministers are there. I mean, that's Kim Campbell, I think he's talking to right now. And there's, as you mentioned, he's just been talking to Stephen Harper. And I think there's something in the fact that they've all turned up. I mean, they're showing something, aren't they, about this is a moment in which they want to support the government of Canada. I mean, I don't believe that former prime ministers always show up for the opening of Parliament, but I think this is a very special occasion. What they're saying, I mean, the King is very good at conversation. He's probably saying, "Nice to see you. Isn't it lovely weather?" I mean, he's done a lot of this in his life.
I think he's, quite used to it. Even if we look at yesterday's visuals, speaking to students, dropping the puck, and doing quite a bit within the community. And as you noted, it is nice for him, health-wise, to be able to make this trip here to Canada. And again, that is symbolic in itself, to be able to physically make this trip, which we know is a long one, but it is a short one by duration. It's about 24 hours to come across the pond and to deliver these key messages, not just the throne speech, but the messages in which we are seeing visually right now. One thing for you, Margaret, I am surprised, and I thought perhaps we might see it more yesterday when we had a lot of interactions with the public, that perhaps there might have been some protests, and we didn't really see a whole lot of that. Does that surprise you?
Well, yeah, it does rather. But I mean, in practice, I think, those who might have been inclined to protest are thinking that they maybe have other things to worry about. Maybe this is not the time to have family quarrels. And as I say, we've never had a strong Republican moment in this country, not a movement in this country, not like the Australians have had. And so I think, if anything, people find the King a pleasant figure. They don't have strong feelings about it. And I'm rather glad that people didn't boo. I think this is not perhaps at the moment what we want to be doing.
As we look ahead through the day, we know there are still a few things on the agenda for King Charles and Queen Camilla post-throne speech. What will you be watching, Margaret?
I'll be watching the reaction of ordinary Canadians, I think. I'll be very interested in what people who've been watching the throne speech take away from it. Has he done, I can't remember, but has he done the famous dropping of the puck yet? Is that going to happen?
He did this yesterday, yes.
Oh, sorry. But I mean, the fact that he's got out, and he was in the market yesterday in Ottawa talking to people, I think he's a very approachable monarch, as approachable, I guess, as monarchs can be. And it'll be interesting to see how Canadians warm up to that.
It truly will be. And we should note that you're currently in the UK, and you've been there for some time, of course, with ties to Oxford University, the University of Toronto. And so you have lived that relationship, and you continue to live that relationship between Canada and the UK. Some final thoughts from you, Margaret, on what's next?
Well, what's next perhaps is a better relationship between Britain and Canada. I mean, I think the British have suddenly taken an interest in Canada more than they have done. I mean, normally Canada is not something that gets mentioned much in the UK media. But everyone here is asking me what Canadians are thinking, how do we feel, recognizing that Canada has been an important country in the world, an important part of the Commonwealth, and on the whole, a really good force in the world. You know, we've promoted international peace, we've promoted international order, and I think perhaps there's more of an appreciation now that Canada's under something of a threat, a considerable threat, that Canada is actually a valuable country and part of the community of nations and has played a very important part.
Truly. Margaret, we appreciate you taking the time with us today. Margaret MacMillan, thank you so much.
Thank you.